for this opportunity to discuss these two themes that are part of what I think it's an overarching theme in the current administration. We have seen an increased conversation in the public in the media and in public government discourse regarding children and family migration in the United States. Families are leaving their homes because of a coalescing of factors that include humanitarian crisis created by both natural disasters and the devastation that accompany the disasters, both in Puerto Rico and in the Central American Triangle, but also by man-made disasters. And I accentuate man-made disasters because these are generally policies by establishment politicians in the United States and their counterparts in Central American countries and also in Puerto Rico. And these two things together, including gang violence and poverty, the austerity measures, have prompted an increased number of people migrating to the United States, and mostly families migrating to the United States. Many of these families, in the case of migrants from Central America, could be considered refugees under international law, because they are families that are migrating because they're in fear of persecution. They have a well-founded fear of persecution in their country on account of one of the 5 enumerated grounds. And we have been positing in the United States for many years that persecution by non-government actors and private actors that the government is unable or unwilling to control should be considered a protected ground under the international refugee law, and therefore people should be granted asylum in the United States. This has been litigated for many years, and the current administration has changed the law in a way that I'm going to discuss to deprive these migrants, refugee migrants, of further protection under the law. There are other groups of people that are also migrating, and we can refer to them as internally displaced persons, which would be the case of people from Puerto Rico that are migrating because of a natural disaster and once again the coalescing of Hurricane Irma and Maria with the long-standing economic crisis that Puerto Rico was facing since 2006, actually even before 2006, and the corresponding austerity measures that were imposed by the United States Congress through a supra-governmental body now called the Junta de Control Fiscal, or the Fiscal Governing Board. To give you an example, the economy in Puerto Rico had been on a downward spiral since 2006, mostly due to the removal of tax exemptions for corporations, manufacturing corporations that had established in the United States and that dominated the Puerto Rican economy, the primary and the secondary economy, because there were many businesses that were giving services to this manufacturing industry that were mostly pharmaceutical industries. Puerto Rico was already there when the Great Recession hit the United States. And although the United States started a slow but quickly started slowly recovering, since 2008, Puerto Rico never started to recover. It was plunged into further economic crisis, and that economic crisis had already marked a migration pattern to the United States. A migration pattern that has been accentuated after Hurricane Maria. The numbers for Puerto Rican migration after Hurricane Maria suggest, according to the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, that by 2019, close to the 14% of population of Puerto Rico might have migrated to the United States. This has a huge number. And who is migrating to the United States? We have seen an increased number of professionals that people want to call a brain drain, although most migrants are not really high-level professionals. They're skilled workers, but not necessarily professionals, but we have seen a particularly drastic migration pattern in doctors. We learned recently that by now, Puerto Rico only has ophthalmologists and psychiatrists in the right numbers to tend to the population need. Every other medical specialization or even general medical practitioners are not enough to serve the population. I've been hearing horror stories about how long it takes to get an appointment with an orthopedic, for example, an orthopedic surgeon, for example, or a hand surgeon, any sort of specialized surgery. Who is migrating then? This is an increasing migration of families and children and families that are headed by single mothers, because Puerto Rico, like the rest of the Caribbean, has a high percentage of female heads of household. And this brings challenges to administration of justice, to children welfare, and Professor Camacho she's going to talk about, she's going to walk us through this process in Puerto Rican migration. Who is migrating to the United States from Central America is also families. There's an overwhelming number of families migrating in the United States. The numbers by the Department of Homeland Security, for example, say that during 2018, only 2018, more than 100,000 family units have migrated to the United States, and more than 50,000 unaccompanied minors. Those are the apprehensions in the southern border during this year alone. And this is coupled with a pattern of unaccompanied migration in the United States, unaccompanied children migration in the United States since 2014, where the numbers of those unaccompanied minors had reached the 100,000. But this is an additional number of migrant families. And what is interesting is that this pattern is similar to refugee migration in the world. So the global pattern of refugee migration and the global numbers regarding refugees tells us that when we think about a refugee, we should have not the face of an Arab man walking through Europe, but what we should be seeing is the face of a child, because 51% of all refugees are deemed to be children. So this pattern of migration is consistent with the global pattern of refugee migration. The crisis of children and migration in the United States has been, of course, exacerbated by the zero-tolerance policy implemented by the Trump administration and Orlando, who works with both unaccompanied minors and children in general that come to the United States. It's going to walk us through that process, the numbers, and what have we seen regarding family separation. But in both cases, in the case of children from Central America that have been forcibly separated at the border and migration from Puerto Rico, the end result is parents and children separated from each other by different reasons, and both patterns of migration have different challenges that we thought important for us to discuss. To give you the latest numbers, and Orlando asked me to share with you the latest numbers that just came out of the ACLU litigation regarding family separation in the United States. 2,654 children were determined to have been separated from their parents. 2,600. 2,300 have been discharged from the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Orlando will explain what is the Office of Refugee Resettlement and how it ends up having care responsibilities over these children. There's 125 children that remain separated as of today. Some of that separation is voluntary, a decision by both parents and children, so the children can remain in the United States to apply for asylum, because many of the parents of those 125 children have already been removed. They're no longer in the United States. 64% of the separated children are male. 103 were under the age of 5. Half of them were under the age of 10.
Is that of the 2,600?
Of the 2,600, more 1,000, a little bit over 1,000 were over the age of 10, under the age of 10, and of the 2,103 were under the age of 5. So these roughly half of the children were under the age of 10, including the under the age of 5. That's my math. Where are these children now? Orlando is going to talk about how does this happen, what are the children, and what are the challenges in representing these children, because as you will see, all of these immigrant children have been placed in removal proceedings. All these children are in deportation proceedings, which means that they have to defend themselves from removal, and the challenges associated with representing children that are in removal proceedings. So in sum, for me, part of before I finish, one of the things that I want to say is that the current policies of the Trump administration, it's purposefully affecting and targeting family migration. So what we have seen in the conversation from the administration includes increased enforcement policies directed to migrant families. One of the first executive orders changed the enforcement priorities that existed before, since 2014. And those enforcement priorities said the government is going to prioritize removing felons, criminal aliens, persons that are a threat to the security and welfare of the United States. When those priorities were removed, everyone became a priority. And family units were an easy target priority. So we have seen in the numbers in enforcement that there's less enforcement of criminal aliens and more enforcement of non-criminal aliens. The zero tolerance policy that prompted family separation. There are, in discussion, proposals to change legal family migration, to change the number and the type of family members that U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents that are in the United States can bring to the United States as family members. So it is the derogatory concept of chain migration, creating a false idea of people migrating without any control to the United States. Well, the truth is that the backlog for family-based migration is so long that an average immigrant visa will take someone more than 10 years to achieve. So there's really not a chain migration. What we really have is a backlog in adjudication family visas to allow for family reunification. But the conversation has shifted.
Sheila, can I ask specifically, you said this shifted and there's a conversation at the policy level?
Yes, so we have already seen draft legislation. So there's already draft in committees to change and restrict, and part of the impasse between the Trump administration and Congress is his proposal to change family immigration and make it more difficult and change the amount of people and the type of family members that can migrate, which is really affecting U.S. citizens that are binational families from reunifying their families. So that is an impasse, and Congress recognizes that these people that are going to be affected are mostly citizens that bring their family members, and citizens do vote. So that conversation, it's a tense conversation between even some Republicans in Congress, especially those Republicans that are in states that have lots of binational families, right? Like Florida, California. There are proposed changes in the way unaccompanied minors are treated. There are proposed regulations that would allow for longer detention of unaccompanied minors, contrary to a court decision on a consent decree as part of a class action litigation that is called the Florida settlement. Changes in asylum protections that target survivors of domestic abuse, especially women survivors of domestic violence. Changes on the policies relating to using government benefits and penalizing families for using government-related benefits. So this conversation about family separation, it seems to me, we have to see it in this whole context of affecting the welfare of all, mostly immigrant families, but Latino families in general. And I think it's a concerted effort that, from my perspective, is racially based, trying to shift the demographics and the continued demographic growth of the non-white population in the United States. And today, we heard the most recent idea from the president is to try to curtail constitutional citizenship, the 14th Amendment citizenship that is a product of the Civil War. This country went to civil war over the concept of who can be a citizen and considered a citizen of the United States. So that's how serious this is. And this is also a way of targeting families and minimizing family presence and the continued growth of a non-white citizen community in the United States. So that's sort of my background, to put things in a little bit of context. And I ask Orlando to talk to us and walk us through family separation from the perspective of immigrant children.
Okay, let's see if I could meet the time requirements.
You are going to meet the time requirements.
Okay. Basically, well, this is my first mistake. It should be 2018 here instead of 18. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm not going back.
Yeah, well, yeah. The thing is, I tried to make a comparison between what was happening before the zero tolerance policy, and the zero tolerance policy started on May, so I took the month before, April 2018. And in those 7-month period before the zero tolerance, there were about 700 children that were separated from their parents. After the zero tolerance, just to give you an idea of how shocking it was, from May 6th to May 19th, 638 parents were separated from their children. So what we usually do in a 7-month period, we just did it in a matter of days. Basically, the government said, well, we are in a crisis, a border crisis. I have to remind you about all those stories about being invaded and things like that. But that's the argument of the government. But if you go to the numbers, and these are the numbers of the Border Patrol, so this is the official numbers. In apprehensions in the fiscal year 2017, it was the lowest number of immigrants that were apprehended since 1971. Since 1971. Yes, the lowest in 46 years. It's a crisis, we're being invaded, but the number says that in the last 46 years, we've never had so less people coming in, trying to come in. Okay. Let's keep on the numbers. Of those people that were apprehended in the border during 2017, October 1, 2016 to September 30, 2017, 39% were families or UAC'S, unaccompanied children. Just to make clear in the language, an UAC is a child that crossed the border without their parents and they are under 18 years old. So if you are under 18 and you are not accompanied by your parents, you are considered a UAC. Basically, so you can have an idea of the great crisis that we're having, the Border Patrol, with all the new agents that have been added, they have more or less around 2,000 agents, 20,000 agents, sorry, 20,000 agents. And if you took the average of how many arrests are those agents performing at the border, it says that they arrest someone in one every 20 days. So you can have an idea of how serious crisis do we have.
God, right?
Basically, the kids, when they arrive, what was happening is you're being separated from your parents, mother, father, whatever. So the kids now, as they are separated, they are entering the United States without their parents. They were separated at the border. So they become UAC'S. And as soon as they become UAC'S, by the settlement of Flores, the Flores settlement, they are assigned, they are taken out from the custody of Homeland Security, and they are sent to the Department of Health and Human Services, specifically to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So all those kids are under the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. That office subcontracts different places around the United States, either as short-term facilities or long-term foster care facilities. Here in the Pittsburgh area, we got a short-term facility.
You're going to probably talk about this, but if not, here's a question. What makes an unaccompanied minor a refugee? Because I understand the concept of refugee that's within a bubble of within the bubble of migrants, there's refugees. And in my head, the concept of refugees implies that they need to be fleeing away from the country because of political reason, right?
No,
Not necessarily, but
No.
or if you could explain that, it'll be. But what makes a child a refugee compared to?
In this case, the UAC's being under the Office of Refugee Resettlement is the result of a judicial agreement.
Okay.
So what makes them go under that office is a judicial settlement.
Okay.
But there are some criteria about what is a person that is a refugee, and maybe Sheila could.
So the fact that they're under the Office of Refugee Resettlement jurisdiction doesn't make them a
A
refugee.
refugee, okay.
That determination of whether they're a refugee or not, it's going to be made by an asylum officer in the case of unaccompanied minors, or by an immigration judge. The Office of Refugee Resettlement has jurisdiction over them because there is a special agreement that's between plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit and the government, and as per that, internal government regulations were adopted to minimize the time that that children are spent in detention, in non-child appropriate settings.
Right.
So the Office of Refugee Resettlement already had these agreements with this shelter to house refugee children. So these children are given the same treatment for purposes of schooling or accommodations and access to courts that children that are deemed to be refugees when entering the United States, that do not have an adult with them. So because this agency already had that expertise way back when, that's why it was placed under the care of refugee settlement. But each child will have to establish, and this child has the burden of proof that they meet the definition of refugee, and a person that is a refugee is someone that is outside her home country and is unable or unwilling to return due to past persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, nationality, religion, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion.
Okay.
Political opinion is one of the 5 categories that can deem someone a refugee. We colloquially, people say, oh, political asylum, but asylum is both one. And interestingly, historically, the first group of refugees recognized under international law were religious-based refugees. were not political refugees. It's just more how we have deemed it in popular culture, but it really fashioned after the events in Europe during the Second World War and the persecution of Jewish people. So it all comes for circle for today.
Thank you.
Before the settlement, what happened was the kids were taken into prison with adults in the same facilities.
So can we say that it's like within that status, it's better for them to have a
It's
refugee
better for them to
status
be
than
out of
the
a jail
prior?
with adults. Exactly.
arrangement.
It's better to be putting that in the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Yes.
And the American Academy of Pediatrics just published a report a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, about the consequences of placing children in detention. And with a strong call for the government not to change any policies that would allow children to be detained for longer periods of time. It's a very comprehensive report. You can go to their page, to the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they have a whole host of resources explaining why this is in the best interest of the child.
Basically, that creates a lot of problems for the government. Children are going to be in ORR facilities for a longer period because, an example, there's I don't know, typical client that I have under that problem. It's a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 9-year-old. What's your name? There's the name. Where are you from? Guatemala. And who are you going to live here with? With my mom. Your mom lives in the United States? Yes. Where does your mom live? In the United States. How could we reunify? I mean, it's a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, it doesn't know what's going on. So they cannot be reunited then with the parents. And they have no information of relatives that could sponsor them. One of the jobs that I perform is to gather all that information and try to help them get in contact with the sponsor and be released to the sponsor care while I take care of the legal part of it.
I just have a question because there's been so much pushback in this country about DACA and the children who arrived when they were very young without documentation. But now we've created a whole nother group of children who are in this country without documentation, and they had parents, some of them had parents when they arrived at the border, but they no longer have parents. I mean, to me it seems like such a huge contradiction. I don't understand.
I completely agree. And there is no logic behind this than politics. You know, like I'm the tough guy and we're doing something so great to save this country for the barbarians at the door, you know, something like that. But there is
so
really
you let in the barbarian children and you keep out the parents.
Anyway, I think that part of the calculations were what happens? They separate parents, they separate children. They went to the parents and put them in jail. And while they are in jail, they offer the parents documents, sign here, and you could be released and sent back to your country. Parents are afraid, they've never been in a jail before. They sign, parents are deported, so now what are we're going to do with the kids? I see that the parents will ask for the kids and send the kids back. So it was kind of a thinking of how to get kids out of here.
But they didn't mark
First,
which kids went where.
first
to
problem,
whose
they
parents.
cannot do the reunification. They cannot attach this parent, means this kid, you know, they belong to each other. They cannot do it. So they got a really big problem over there. And second, there are kids that have relief under immigration law. And probably parents too, but they do not advise the parents that they have relief under immigration law. They just sign and you'll be out of here. You're having a hard time here. Come on, sign here and you're out. So they go out, and now there is a conflict of interest between the interest of the father, who wants to be out of prison, and the interest of the kids, who got a legal relief under immigration law. So it's kind of putting the families together to fight inside house. It's a mess. Anyway, So that's part of the effects. Now, we got kids, usually before this zero tolerance program, my clients were 16-year-old who knows at least who the father is, where the mother lives, and things like that. So it was easier to help them. But with those kids of such a young age, it's too difficult to do it. So what else happens? Offense, well, federal courts, dockets are overwhelmed with this. Yeah. And there is an increase in the budget for immigration enforcement. Now the White House is requesting 5,000 additional officers in the border. With what they have now, they arrest one person every 20 days. Imagine with 5,000 more. It will be kind of a vacation, I think. But anyway, White House requests 1.6 billion for the border wall because and immigration enforcement right now cost is over 20 billion each year, which is a number that exceeds all other federal law enforcement budgets combined. What does it mean for a family to come into the United States? Usually, this area here, the triangle, the Mayan triangle, whatever you want to call it, is the main source of people coming into the United States. But from Mexico, there are a lot of people crossing, but they got an agreement with Mexico where they can deport them right at the border. So it works differently. But for most of them, mean having to travel long distances. As they are usually poor people, they don't have the money to buy tickets for trains and things like that. So they travel on top of trains. They arrive then to very arid areas, deserts that they have to cross. Usually try to protect them from the sun, cap, have some water, start walking. They arrive to a river and they have to cross the river. I remember one of my first cases, it was a 10-year-old girl that told me her story about when they arrived to the river. She doesn't know how to swim. And the uncle said, well, just hand on my shoulders and I will cross, because there was a part where he believed he could go and walk across. But he couldn't, so he had to turn back. There was another person there that she didn't know, a young man, that says, we're gonna make this work. So between both of them, they start swimming. They told the kid to move the feet like this. And she told me, they told me to move the feet. So he started doing it. And when we were right like in the middle of all of it, there was a helicopter over the river, lights over the river looking for immigrants. Huh? So they tell the girl, well, you have to hold your breath and we're going to go under the water. And she started holding her breath and going under the water until they could make it to the other side. So the helicopter did not spot them, but of course they did, and they were detained at the other side. If you don't want to cross the river, you can keep on going up north towards the sea, and that's the desert that then you have to cross with what the wall is right now. So it's not easier. Many people does not make it to the other side. That's a real picture of some governmental employee taking the information about people that they found dead doing. As a matter of fact, there are death maps with the routes that the immigrants take, with the statistic of how many people die in each route and things like that. You can find those things across the border, just cross, and that someone couldn't make it. And some of them, when you can identify the body, are then repatriated, so you could go back to your country, but it's not in a good way. Why do they take so much risk in order to come? Basically, there are 4 reasons. First one, to escape violence. Second, to find family members in the United States. Third, to try to support themselves. Poverty is one of the driving factors of that migration. And because you are a victim of human trafficking. And that's, again, Border Patrol's statistics. That's what the Border Patrol says are the main reasons. And what is this thing about escape violence, and I put maras? Let's talk a little bit about the maras. Maras are gangs that usually they handle everything that leaves money. Okay? Prostitution, drugs, you name it, if there is money behind it and it's illegal, they have got their hands on it. Okay? Those are pictures of different mareros. They are usually two big maras in Central America, and they try to keep them separated because they kill each other if they see each other. One is the 18th. See the numbers? The tattoos in the face, 18th. Of course, if you are an 18th, you cannot marry someone from the other gang. I got lots of kids that says that they live like in the boundaries between two territories, and it's horrible, horrible. They check on who you are talking to, where do you walk around, so you don't get into the other side because they believe that you're going to betray them, and it's a horrible thing. So you can have an idea of how powerful are those groups. They even got enough power to sit down with the government to call for a truce. And as by one of their leaders said, it was easy to sit the government down to negotiations with them because it was just a matter of putting enough dead bodies in the streets, and the government will have to come to you and negotiate with you. Very briefly, MS-13 is one of the gangs. It started in the late 70s in California. Today it has some estimate between 50,000 to 70,000 members and have expanded to El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Europe. And in Mexico, they work together with the Mexican drug cartels. The other, Barrio 18, emerged as a small-time street gang in Los Angeles in the late 50s. But in their current form, it took place in the 80s. They got an estimated between 30,000 to 80,000 members, and they gained notoriety for their role in the riots following the acquittal of the police who brutally beat Rodney King. Basically, they do everything: murder for hire, drug sales, prostitution, extortion, kidnapping, you name it. And how those groups became so big and go through so many countries and things like that. But the studies shows that in the 90s, the immigration policies were changed, and the number of criminal charges for a foreign-born resident so you could deport that foreign-born resident augmented, increased, and they took advantage also of the traditional migrant parents. So we got a problem that is a local gang problem. We put them into jails. We deport them. Now they are in their countries, but they still got contacts in the United States. And now we are expanding the problem to be an international problem because it covers more than one country. So this is the result of Iron Fist policies. In the prison, including federal prison, they provide a base in which they could recruit new members and imagine, you go to a prison, everybody's speaking English. There are groups inside the prison, black people, whatever, huh? You are alone. You are Latin. And the only other Latin guys that are there are mareros from the group.
Yeah.
So you need protection. You go to them, and the maras is increasing. Okay. Just a quick look to Amarero. Do you want me to get into, well, definition of UAC, not 18 years old, unlawful immigrant status, no parents, that's the UAC, we already said. There are some problems when we are dealing with those kids. The age, they are too young, they don't know enough to help in their defense. They are afraid, they have been experiencing trauma, a traumatic experience, not just through the... I had clients that had been raped during the trip, that had been kidnapped by cartels while trying to cross the border, and they have been beaten. I got a kid, a young kid. Now part of the problem is that there are some Mexican cartels that don't want coyotes helping people to cross. So they asked the kid, who's the coyote in this group? The cartel intercepted a group. Who's the coyote in this group? And the kid was, imagine, he was like 10 years old. He signaled the person, which was a woman who was transporting them, in front of the kid with a baseball bat. Boom, boom, boom. Woman unconscious, they take the woman out. The kid said, I never saw the woman again, I don't know what happened. I mean, for me that would be a really traumatic experience for my rest of my life. So they are victims of trauma. They got many times not just cultural differences, but the language barriers. In Guatemala, there are about 20 different dialects. So we have to use drawing things for the kids, explain them what's a judge, what's a lawyer, what they are doing. It's an example of one of our booklets for the kids. So you get an idea. This is just different Mayan languages that are spoken in Guatemala. So sometimes I got kids, well, many times I got kids that speak Spanish like in the level of my name is and how are you and things like that. But when you try to explain something else, they just go in blank because their language is Ichil, their language is Quiche, their language is Mam, their language is Chu. Now I got someone who speaks Chu, but not any Chu. Chu from a special region that is not the same as the, I mean, it's a mess. That besides the idea that I'm a lawyer, even if I got someone to translate, I'm a lawyer. Do you know what a lawyer is? Do you know what a judge is? Do you know? Because they got no cultural reference to that. So, basically, this is the most common forms of relief for those kids, and that's what we are trying to receive information from the kid that is enough to present one of those relief in court. And I think that's it.
Yeah, one thing to that, I mean, what I talked to you before, is that that's if you as a lawyer get to go and present. Because most of these kids have no representation. Their infants are being told that they have to represent themselves. And they don't.
In immigration court, there's no right to be represented by an attorney if it's costly to the government. So you have a right to counsel at no cost to the government.
So if you can pay for it, the toddler
Exactly.
at 5 years old.
And,
Wow.
and there's not enough attorneys working pro bono to represent all these children throughout the United States.
Let alone ask for it.
So you're working pro bono?
I'm working for an institution that is a non-profit organization that receives funding from the Vera Institute of Justice in order to offer legal representation to those kids.
And you've heard in the news this couple of days the word, the acronym HIAS. So Jewish Family and Children's Services is the local partner of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. So they represent immigrants and refugees, including unaccompanied minors, but a wide host of immigrants and refugees that live in the Pittsburgh region and all of Western Pennsylvania. So it's funded most by grants, but
Right.
also funded by HIAS and different organizations and foundations.
There's one more question, then we'll get to your presentation. We have the room till 1:30, I think, so you can stay until then. So I want to hear the other presentation, but you have one quick
I
question?
was just wondering, how did the children get to Pittsburgh?
Okay, they are detained at the border.
Right.
They are separate from their parents.
So you're talking Arizona or something?
Arizona, El Paso, Texas, for McAllen, well, anyway, wherever they try to enter, they are separate from the adult. They are kept apart to take the information like fingerprints. Well, if they are too young, they don't fingerprint them, but anyway, usually they fingerprint them, photos, they get all the information that they could gather from them. After that, as they are sent to our ORR, where they are placed, we're under ORR custody, then ORR goes to their shop board and says, where do I have beds for these kids? Anywhere around the United States, the ones that are open. And some of them, and in Pittsburgh, some of them came to be reunited with a family member that lives in Houston, Texas. They were already in Texas, but ORR, they don't have any room available for them in Texas, so they sent them to Pittsburgh. And after a couple of months, they reunite them with the families in Texas. The first trip is paid by the government. The trip back to the family to be reunited is paid by the parents.
I have a question. Sorry. To which extent did the international law protects these families and kids when they're searching for asylum, for example?
If they are searching for asylum, the international law is that you have to receive it as a country. You want to add something? You have to.
The United States, it's a party to the International Refugee Convention, and it's a signatory of the 1967 Optional Protocol. Since the 1980s, there are internal regulations that make the process for obtaining asylum in the United States part of domestic immigration law. So the protections that these families are due are the protections that immigrants receive in general under the immigration law of the United States. There's very little special treatment for asylum seekers. Asylum seekers cannot work in the United States unless their asylum application has been pending for 150 years. Asylum seekers, asylum seekers have to apply for asylum within 1 year of entering the United States. If they don't apply within 1 year, they can apply of other types of reliefs related to refugee convention relief, but that doesn't give them a permanent status in the United States. So there's nothing in domestic law that says that an asylum seeker cannot be detained. Asylum seekers are detained all the time. There's nothing in our domestic law that prohibits asylum seekers from being detained.
The last presentation?
And so Professor Camacho Melendez is a professor of family law at the Inter-American University School of Law, and she has been a family law professor for many years. I'm not going to say how many, but for many years she has her PhD from the University of the last country, and it's a pleasure for us to have her here today.
More than 20 years. I don't know how it happened. I am going to talk to you about forced family separations and the Puerto Rican case. That is a very particular situation in the relationship with the United States. But I'm telling something to you about Puerto Rico and about our Taino culture. Taino were the people who lived in Puerto Rico when the Spaniards arrived, and they have this religion where Huracan was the evil god in their religion. So Huracan is a Taino word that They use those lines in a religious well to the evil, as an evil. And it's our most famous word, our Taino most famous word. What are we going to see in how many times I have? 15 minutes more or less. An overview of the different migrations of Puerto Rican families with emphasis on migration to the United States, family conflicts, our economic crisis that Sheila already told to you, and austerity measures, and migration family conflicts in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. We had really 2 hurricanes last year, but Maria was terrible. About Puerto Rican migration, people believe that the only Puerto Rican migration to the U.S. was to the New York area, and everybody believes that we are all West Side Story. West Side Story people. Not so really. Yeah, really different. It was a great movie. Puerto Rico is a country of immigrants. We immigrate, and other people like Cubans, like Dominicans, like Venezuelans, and sometimes migrate to our island, and little by little we become different. That's our magic. And we had a very diverse culture because of that. We are here in the Caribbean, and the migration between Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Cuba had been in the history. We went there, and by now they come to Puerto Rico. The first case in the United States Supreme Court about a Puerto Rican migration is Gonzales versus Williams. Isabella Gonzales was an unmarried woman who was born and resided in Puerto Rico and was an inhabitant therefore in 1899. The U.S. invasion to Puerto Rico was in 1898, the year before. And they signed a treaty with Spain, the Treaty of Paris. And it was after the proclamation of the Treaty of Paris. She arrived at the port of New York from Puerto Rico in 1902 when she was prevented from landing and detained on the immigration commissioner at that port as an alien immigrant. In order that she may return to Puerto Rico, it did appear that she was likely to become a public charge. Not so many changes since 1902. This opinion is part of the doctrine known as the insular cases. These cases analyze the political relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States and establish the territorial status of the island Puerto Rico belongs to, but is not part of the United States. Before these cases, Puerto Rican we have, and with other laws, other regulations, we have free entrance to the United States. The pattern of mobility changed in an important way as a result of the immigration policies that since the 1940s promoted the relocation of Puerto Ricans to the metropolis to work here, usually in the agriculture. And this was a commercial from that time. Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, people came here in ships at that time, 1947. And this was in an airplane. It was a massive migrations in those times from Puerto Rico to New York, Connecticut, more or less in that era. Puerto Rico went to New York, Chicago, New Jersey, Connecticut, and more recently to Florida. But in Florida, it's not only the Puerto Rican from the island. They go south from New York, from Chicago to Florida too. And right now, we are 3 million Puerto Ricans in the island, and more than 1 million in Florida, more than 1 million in New York, and more than 1 million in the other areas. So the diaspora is bigger than the people in the island. When we talk about migration and family relations, all these migratory phenomena impact family relations. The Puerto Rican family is divided with relatives in the U.S. and on the island, and it has a great impact with the economic crisis and the austerity measures. As you know, in times of economic crisis, the most vulnerable populations and poor families suffer the worst consequences. as Sheila said, we have an important economic crisis since 2006. 2006, yes, 2006 more or less. Poor families are also under the continual lens of social services agencies, often exposing them to conflict with the legal order. It's not the same situation with a poor family or a middle-class family immigrant. Eliminating or decreasing the existing social responsibility measures directly affect poor families, and this is part of the austerity measure that they are taking in the island since 2000. And why we talk about forced family separation? We talk about forced family separation is not the same situation that Orlando speaks about the Maya Triangle, very, very different situation. But we talk about forced family separations because the U.S. government in the 40s and in the 50s, they promote the migration. We call it the cage metaphor. They wanted this military strategic island in that era empty. They wanted 3 islands. We have military bases in all the island. The island was divided as for military purposes. And then we use that image, the empty cage metaphor. They wanted the island empty. Economic struggles and unemployment, our unemployment numbers are very high. Academic and professional opportunities, like some people here. Family conflicts, and when you talk about family conflicts, you can talk about family violence too. Right? You are a better woman with children, and you can have an airplane to go away from the abuser. It's good, and you don't need a visa. You only need the ticket. Family reunification. I believe that this is the main reason why Puerto Ricans go north. Family reunification, the left behind relatives, someday they arrive to the States to be with their family, with their spouse, with their children, with the sister, with the brother, with the family. And it is very interesting that if you are from Ponce or if you are from Peñuela, for example, you go to Connecticut. That's it. If you are from Adjuntas or for Yauco, you go to Chicago. You move where you knew people, where you have friends and family. What happened in the aftermath of the hurricane? Puerto Rico's population, before the hurricane, have been shrinking from the last decade to its fiscal crisis. Puerto Rican find jobs here. That's for real. You are unemployed in the island, and via Skype, you made an interview and you have a job in 2 weeks here with better salaries and better conditions. And it is with professionals, but not necessarily, not solamente, it's not only with professionals. A year after the hurricane was in 2017, in September 20th. A year after the hurricane, the exodus is a growing problem for the island, but it's like exhaust valve. It's like, just a second, the exhaust valve. Beyond the loss of human life and destruction that we had with the hurricane, Maria is reshaping our population and is reshaping our communities. We are a different people before the hurricane. Obviously, studies suggest hurricanes and other natural disasters prompt people to migrate. We have thousands of people in the airports after the hurricane. It was terrible. And with ships too, and the cruise lines, it was free. It was free for people to go to the port And to go in the cruise and arrive to Florida, it was for free. And you have the same services that you have in the cruise when you are in vacations. It wasn't a different kind of travel. It was exactly the same travel. And these people arrived to Florida without thinking about it. They were escaping from the situation in the country before the hurricane, but they weren't thinking about what we have in Florida. And as you may see,
So this was a one-way ticket?
it was a one-way free ticket.
Who paid for it?
The cruise.
The cruise lines?
Cruise line paid.
Yes. Then we got it for the employer's family. It was the first idea, but after the first travel, they continued to visit people there. And I knew people who had already work offers, job offers in Florida. And it was very good to them because the airplane, you can fly who usually cost like perhaps $150 or $200 can cost after the hurricane $1,000. That was 4 or 5 times. So people who, okay, they have a job in the Florida, and they took the chips. And you can see there are children and there are elders, and it was with the people. Everybody was there representing. Intermujeres is a non-profit organization from a university, from the American University of Puerto Rico. They perform a 5-study with focus group with women from 6 communities in various municipalities in Puerto Rico, La Perla, Hinojo San Juan, Yabucoa, Comerío, Humacao, Ayonito, and with the Dominican immigrants in San Juan. We have a very large Dominican community in Puerto Rico. And during the sessions, they collected information regarding topics of health, as issues after the hurricane, like risk and violence situations, government response that was almost zero, and community leadership, among others. This research also confirmed a significant migratory movement to various cities in the United States, mainly, as I said before, where relatives reside. And this migration is notable for the transfer of 3 groups. In the first step, elderly people and people with health problems, because the health issue was the main issue after the hurricane. And if you have your grandfather who's sick and you have a chip that is offering you to translate him to Florida, you are going to transfer him to Florida. Secondly, young people looking for better job opportunities, because people lost their job. If, for example, Plaza Las Americas is a big mall, shopping center in Puerto Rico, and until today, Sears store is a wood store until today. So we are not recovering. We are not Sears. It's not recovering after more than a year. So people lost their job. There were many good employers. For example, Best Buy was an excellent employer. They paid for the elder families of their employees to travel to the States. Marshalls paid their employees as they were working, but vaya usted de contar. Others don't do that, so people lost their jobs. And finally, families in their various family farms, especially women alone with school-aged children, had been not only after the hurricane, before the hurricane. These two, not the elder, that is a hurricane phenomenon. But young people looking for better jobs, opportunities, and families looking for better opportunities, they are the main groups. Studies confirm that many elderly returned to Puerto Rico when was established some basic services. We were without power, without electricity power in some areas, like almost a year. And there are some pockets, they call it pockets, that doesn't have power right now. And while young people and families with children decide to start a new life outside of Puerto Rico. This is a map. This is where people from Puerto Rico ask for help to FEMA in the state. So when they ask for FEMA help, they were almost in every state. But of course, Florida stays, yes, and New York, because we are there too. We Puerto Ricans, we are in New York and in Florida.
2 minutes.
Huh? Okay. And
Sorry.
it's okay, I'm finishing. This is about numbers, and Sheila talked about numbers. This is a very big problem that FEMA cuts off housing funds for Puerto Rican families who fled Hurricane Maria after a year. But this has been a very slow recovery. You can measure the Puerto Rican recovery as you can measure the Harvey recovery in Texas. It's more like Louisiana with Katrina. It has been, these people doesn't have where to return in Puerto Rico. I'm going to pass to the children in the aftermath, and I believe that it is very important. There wasn't any social responsibility or governance good response after the hurricane. These children these kids lost their home, lost their schools, and their support networks, their teachers, the family, friends, medication, it was crucial. And for many of these children, this loss also includes living on the island, their friends, relatives, and in many cases, one of their parents, or both parents, because many families send only the children with the aunt, with the grandmother to the States because of the situation. The effect of poverty combined with the trauma of living through a natural disaster, and this was a terrible natural disaster, will not fade away easily. And this is about school. I didn't know I really liked school until I could go. This is the person. 44% of minors exhibit new behaviors after the hurricane, with 23 of that group experiencing anxiety. Children under 5-year-old went an average of 92 days without attending preschool, so their parents that have to go to work, it was a very difficult situation. While children between 5 and 70 years old are estimated to have spent an average of 78 days away from school. And children with disabilities, 3 out of 10 children that require medication for treatment had difficulty obtaining it. This, I believe, as Sheila said, that the health situation is the worst because of the hurricane. What regulations do we have to deal with the family conflicts to pass as a legal dispute? We have more or less the same regulation than the states, interjurisdictional child custody and child support, parental kidnapping, relocation issues. We haven't approved the interjurisdictional child support, so for custody dispute, including interjurisdictional dispute, we use civil code revolutions and Puerto Rico Supreme Court jurisprudence. We use the best interest of the child doctrine. We have not allowed the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Act, but we need to use the Parental Kidnapping Prevention Act to establish jurisdiction, in which cases we can take decisions about child welfare. This is some cases, but we have the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act, that is in Spanish is the Uniforme Soberanía para la Familia, and it's the same child support system in the States. So if you have a kid and you send it here, we have a very, very good system to deal with the child support of these children, but people doesn't have jobs. It has a good system, but people doesn't have income. We had many relocation disputes. Before the hurricane, we have this law, Virtual Visitation Act, that if you come to the state with children, you need to assure the court that you will have Skype and that this kid will communicate with the family left behind. But in the aftermath of the hurricane, we approved in May the Uniform Guide for Relocation Cases of the custodial parent. This is the same law, more or less, the same act that had been approved in this state. And when is the relocalization will be allowed? It's not to prevent the relationship of the children with the non-custodial parent. It was a hurricane, it was not the reason. There is a valid and decisive decision for relocating, and it will offer a better life. And this is, someone asked me if this act is pro-relocation or against relocation. I believe that it is pro-relocation because the people and the government understand migration like an exhaust valve. It's a manner to resolve some problems in the island. And finally, about family violence after the hurricane, during the first 8 months, the number of women killed by their partners was duplicated compared to the first 8 months of 2017. In the first 8 months, from January to September to August, 2017, it was 7 women, and between January and September 2018. After the hurricane, it was 14 women. Duplicate. I want to finish with a poem that is Boricua en la Luna. It's about the diaspora. And it is my translation, so take it easy with me.